Thank you, Kala, for that introduction. And you made my job easier because you have already introduced lead and scarf, which I was also planning to do. So let me share my screen for a moment, Panji. So grateful to Oxford for this opportunity and for the collaboration with Kriya, of course, ongoing with the students as well. So in the spirit of collaboration, like Dr. Vishnu was pointing out, uh, I have Preeti, my colleague Preeti, and Kaustav and Ananya, who will jump into certain slides, some slides as we go through. Um, and um, and the presentation will cover some a bit of about lead and about scarf and then about the study. Ananya and Costa will present a review of literature and we'll just go into this results. We are early into the results because we just have done the analysis last week and we are yet to get into the interpretations part of it, so which will be done with a lot more input from scarf and a lot more thinking from literature as well. So as Kala was presenting, LEAD has a lot of the research that LEAD has done in the past decade and a half. I mean, around 200 studies and evaluations, and the number of households, multiple number of studies that have been done this time. Um, when we talk about leveraging evidence, a lot of the leveraging evidence happens because we are able to have these ongoing partnerships with multiple organizations, whether it is donor organization, grassroots level NGOs, academic institutes. We also work a lot with the government and policymakers. Our expertise is across multiple theme areas: financial inclusion, we have livelihoods and entrepreneurship, infrastructure, governance, health. A lot of these studies are across, and of course, cross-cutting gender-based violence. We of course work with the IWAGE and other things looking into gender-based studies as well. Um, so briefly, SCARF has been around serving geographically the area of Chennai for the past almost 4 decades, and their work, the geography, it does not it's not about the geography that it covers, Chennai, but scarf also does a lot of training and has been a think tank for mental health in India, and I think a lot of the organizations, NGOs within India do know about scarf and the training that it provides. So it is recognized by the Department of Science and Technology. It's a WHO collaborating center. And a lot of its services, like I mentioned, has got outpatient, inpatient services, community mental health services, and telepsychiatry, dementia care, and they also work in research, training, and awareness programs. So they have been a partner with us for this particular project, and a lot of what we were trying to do is looking at how COVID impacted each of these services and what happened, what were the challenges that they faced. So basically, if you look at all of the existing evidence that comes out when we're thinking about mental health and COVID, what we see is, you have a lot of the evidence looking at general population and how did COVID affect them. While this is not an unimportant area, it's a very important public health area. But we have not yet looked in depth at health systems and how, especially for mental health, how these were impacted. Particularly, I have to mention the work that NGOs do in India. The National Mental Health Program that is looking at expanding out to the communities is a pretty much at its infancy, and a lot of the work is being done by NGOs. Uh, and a lot of this NGOs, Ananya will speak about in her literature review. But what we wanted to also then look at, was a very important time for us to look at how are the community-based structures getting affected, especially for reaching out to mentally ill, because a lot of the mentally ill in India are living within their communities, are living within their families, and are given care by their families. and often in daycare kind of situation. So it was very important. And I just was reading a recent Lancet paper, which was commenting that it is very important time for us to look at the evidences coming from the ground, especially from NGOs, to look at how what are the learnings that the National Mental Health Program can take away from COVID. And this is a time for great challenges, but it's also a time for opportunities for us to learn and build the public health system for mental health in India. So for review of literature, I will now ask Costa to jump in and look at some of the evidences from international evidences, and then Ananya will bring in some of the India-based evidences. Over to you, Costa.
Thank you, Sapna. So, I'll be considering the impact that COVID 19 has had on mental health services around the world. Now, you see, broadly speaking, the changes can be categorized as you see in the presentation based on its impact on the inpatient, the outpatient, and the pharmacological services that are rendered by psychiatry facilities globally. So, on the inpatient side, we see that facilities have tightened up their criteria to admit patients and choose to admit some, but not all. And they also have reduced the time that patients spend inside facilities. Now, this is to minimize the number of people in the facility, and this also prioritizes care to those who really need it. And it's also called triage protocol in the domain parlance. We've also seen vulnerable demographics of healthcare workers being asked to work remotely in a healthcare field that is already so deprived of sufficient human resources. And for those who do work in the facilities, isolation wards have been set up to segregate patients who are COVID symptomatic from those who aren't. Furthermore, existing treatments have been modified, keeping in mind social distancing. And this is a very tricky thing to do, given the nature of free interaction between patients in the pre COVID psychiatry facilities. Um, Moving to outpatient services, the most significant change around the globe has been the deployment of consultation over the internet. Now, this has been met with much positive reception on both the caregiver and the receiver side. However, it has also had its negative impacts, especially on patients who lack the accessibility or the technology know how to receive the care that they require. On the topic of accessibility, we see that patients who rely on medication were also impacted by COVID due to drug distribution around the world being impacted by a global commonality, which is lockdowns. As a response to this, telemedicine and teleprescription had gained the support of the law in most countries, and they allowed pharmacies to accept both electronic prescriptions along with expired ones. At a macro level, the similarities and differences between countries are stark. For one, the imposition of lockdowns in most countries led to a rise in new psychiatric cases and a worsening of pre existing ones. While some countries could adapt to cope, and these are usually the ones with more sophisticated healthcare systems, others resorted to just suspending them altogether in the early days of the pandemic, or rather, I should say, early months of the pandemic. Um, what is painfully obvious is that our global mental health infrastructure is not built to cope with infectious diseases. While teleconsultation services have been used to achieve great efficacy and reach, and they have, however, many have still been left out in the process. And across the board, there haven't been consistent protocols by which healthcare facilities manage patients during outbreaks. And this is perhaps the biggest takeaway for mental health services in the post COVID world, that we need to formulate adequate protocols as we brace ourselves for diseases of the future. I'd like to pass it on to Ananya to talk about COVID's impact on India's mental health services. Thank you.
Thank you, Kaustubh and Sapna. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. So my literature review, Sapna, could we go to the next slide?
Oh, sorry.
No, thank you. So my literature review basically focused on how COVID-19 impacted mental health services in India. And these, as you can see on the slide, can be broadly categorized into the guidelines released, institutional reactions, and the way institutions adapted to these challenges. And the third and last category, which is very special to India would be the action of non-governmental organizations. So talking about the first part, which is about guidelines and the impact on mental health services, the first action was taken by the government of India on the 25th of March when they released the telemedicine practice guidelines. Telepsychiatry was used to help cope with the increased number of cases as well as the lack of in-person consultations by government hospitals, teaching institutes, as well as organizations in the private sector. But the impact on psychiatry services that provided these services could broadly be categorized into a collapse in inpatient and outpatient care, as Kaustav mentioned, but also it affected specific treatments, for example, consultation liaison psychiatry and electroconvulsive therapy. A lot of these specialized treatments needed access to medical facilities, a lot of which collapsed due to the increased number of COVID cases. Another effect that this had was the redistribution of medical staff within institutions themselves. And this redistribution was basically because a lot of mental health workers and care providers were engaged in services which included helpline services, screening of people in quarantine for mental health issues, providing clinical care to COVID-19 patients, screening healthcare workers for medical issues, etc. And with this, we kind of get into the next part, which were the challenges that were faced. The first part, which was the modification of psychological treatments to suit teleconsultations and adapting in-person therapies with social distancing, led to a huge problem, which mental health care workers found very challenging, because they found that a lot of the effects that this had was poor rapport with patients, difficulty in diagnosing the problem, and a lack of empathy with patients, especially over video and audio channels as well. Other issues included staff management, legal issues, etc. There were also challenges in particular fields, for example, geriatric mental health care, because there was an amplification of issues in the geriatric sector with the pandemic, because in India, over 70% of the elderly stay in villages and rural areas, and most of these services were provided in urban areas. There was also an inaccessibility for older people to travel to these urban areas, which made this harder. And the last segment that we come to as we talk about mental health care in rural areas is the action of non-governmental organizations. So as spoken before, a lot of the mental health services provided in India were through government and state funded organizations. But another very key component to these service providers is the non-governmental sector. A significant portion of them work in rural areas, and some of these organizations include SCARF, an organization called Sangha that operates out of Goa, Abhaya in Kerala, Umeed Medico-Pastoral Association, the Banyan, etc. The first step was to create a distress helpline, which the public could access easily from all over the country. Sangat and a couple more organizations in alliance with the government of India did release the COVIDAV.com, which is an online platform that was set up for people from all over India to access these mental health helplines, as well as it had a resource pool of self-help resources as well as helpline numbers. But more importantly, these organizers also sent out outreach teams to rural and semi-rural areas to help those in need. A lot of the reports on this, I must mention, has come from grey literature, as there's not a lot of published literature in these areas. But the work done by these organizations in rural areas is extremely critical to our study. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ananya. So next, we just look at the methods that we followed for this particular study, which was a primary study, and it was a qualitative study. We did in-depth interviews and focus group discussions. We initially mapped all of the service areas, and we also looked at different kinds across hierarchy. We tried to include managers, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, all of the group, and then we went on to do 10 in-depth interviews, and we also did one FGD, which was done in December. This was done across November and December, and we did the FGD mostly as a reflexive exercise to look at where are we going, what were the reflections that the providers were coming up with, what were the thoughts, to summarize all of that with the focus group discussion. And Dr. Padmavati towards the end will also give some of her own reflections to add to that. So to do a deep dive into the results section, I invite my colleague Preeti.
Oh, Preeti, you're on mute.
Preeti, you need to unmute.
Can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So the earlier part of the presentation showed a really long list of services that staff offers. But for this study, we are presenting the results in these four categories: pharmacological, non-pharmacological, residential services, and outreach research and training. And this is really a three-part story. The first part actually shows how the lockdown really hit the clients and service providers for that matter, what was really affected, and having come to the conclusion that this cannot be suspended, that continuity has to be there. What were the adaptations taken up by the organization in order to continue delivering these services? And the third part being, continuously managing all the challenges that came up in these adaptations. So let's look at these in detail. The first is the impact of the pandemic and the lockdown on services. Like all of us know, there were issues, there were travel restrictions, timing restrictions, etc., and that really made it difficult for people to travel to the clinic and access these services. And second part is that most of them who came to the organization were getting the medicines from the clinic itself, but they had to find alternatives to get these medications nearby in their neighborhood. Things got affected from the service provider end as well. The number of people who were able to come to the clinic was reduced. Admissions to the inpatient centers was stopped for a while because of the risk, the infection risk that it brings with it. There were impact on patients with respect to heightened levels of anxiety and awareness with messages going around in the social media, the IP residents, consuming the news on the television, etc. All this led to a heightened level of anxiety among patients. Even for caregivers, it was a little bit difficult because a lot of them were facing job loss, pay cuts, etc. And on top of all that, and being cooped up in the same place and encountering interpersonal issues with their family, they also had to continue giving care to their mentally ill family members without any respite. There was personal impact as well from the health worker side. Work-life balance was severely affected. The timings of operations were stretched. They really missed socializing with their colleagues. And there was also threat perception with respect to them traveling to and from the center, worrying about putting their own family members at risk, etc. Moving on to the adaptation. So now we know what the context was and how the service providers and the clients were all affected. So what did the organization do in order to tackle all these, all the impact that they were facing? So the operations and management department is like the backbone of the whole system, trying to coordinate all the services together. So what they did was they first put a roster system in place where people came in rotation and there was a change in shift timings so that the in and out movement of people was reduced. Standard operating procedures were put in place even before the lockdown was announced. Like there were standard precautions like sanitization.
See, you're breaking up a little bit.
Was followed, but apart from that, is it better now?
Yes, go ahead.
Uh, Standard operating procedures such as sanitization, social distancing were followed. But apart from that, they also changed the movement of how the patients come in and out of the building. Then there was a dedicated helpline put in place for anybody, like be it existing patients or new patients, to be able to access services, and they will be redirected to the appropriate service providers. The admin personnel also had to issue government mandated identities, and official letters were given for the people also helping in transporting some of the supplies and the people in and out of the center. Informal communication channels were put in place to coordinate the work amongst themselves and to make decisions. So the most challenging part of this was that the admin personnel had to be always available on phone, because even though they had issued identities and letters, etc., some of the times the police would still stop them while they were commuting, the staff especially, and they had to always be on the phone to be able to clarify that to the police. So that was one of the most important challenges there. And also, if one of the people on the roster did have to drop out because if they got affected by COVID or if they couldn't make it, then constant effort had to be put in to make sure that the system was still functioning even if one or two people drop out of the roster. So these were the challenges with respect to operations and management. Moving on to pharmacological services, there was a mix of in-person and teleconsultation practices. Remote case management was involved, where case managers who were assigned to patients were doing a detailed conversation over the phone about history, current issue, etc., and then passing them on to the consultant. And this significantly reduced the time that the patient spent with the consultant at the clinic. Telemedicine guidelines were followed, where prescriptions were written out on the official prescription, where pads with the address, the registration number, etc., and was signed. Pictures were taken and shared over WhatsApp. So, although this worked really well for people to continue taking their treatments and medications, some of the challenges were that patients would call the consultants or the staff, trying to understand the prescription and meet the challenges that the pharmacists were presenting with respect to understanding what the real medicine is, what is the chemical name versus the brand name, the duration of the prescription, etc. Moving on to non-pharmacological services, the psychosocial rehabilitation, vocational rehabilitation activities were all shifted to an audio or a video call mode. The rehabilitation center itself was closed down and it was all done over phone. With respect to residential centers, visitors were not allowed to visit their inpatients due to the risk of infection. But the people working there, the staff working in these residential centers, took personal initiatives and helped connect the inpatients to their families over audio and video calls using their own personal mobile phones. And even here, the very similar authentication problem happened, where if they had to discharge an inpatient, the admin personnel had to issue letters explaining the reason for commuting, the family members to commute to the center and take the patient from the center back home. So again, they had to be available on the phone to clarify to the police the reason for which they are. Outreach, training, and research were all again shifted to virtual mode. Both academic programs that were run by staff and those programs where they were supporting practical exposure for students studying in college were all shifted to virtual mode. Some of the group sessions had to be shifted to one-on-one mode because different institutions ended up following different timelines and different syllabus, etc. For research projects, data was collected again on the virtual mode. Video conferencing method was employed for public outreach programs. While all of them really did not, maybe there would have been a brief break, but there was continuity was ensured in outreach training and research services as well. So that's what I have from myself.
Thank you very much, Preeti, for the deep dive. So we come out of that deep dive into looking at some of the insights and reflections that we have. And we have that in three areas, mainly the professional or organizational level. We have one at the personal level and one that was drawn in terms of policy and environment. What are the changes or what are the insights that can be drawn? So at the professional level and at the organization level, something that SCARF, the service providers at SCARF felt that, while they had a lot of experience from handling the tsunami in 2004 and the Chennai floods that happened in 2050. And there were a lot of learnings, telepsychiatry they were already doing, and a lot of those things were happening. And they already had a psychoeducation program existing for adherence and compliance to treatment. But yet, they thought that there were additional guidelines and trainings that are required, especially for caregivers, because in a pandemic situation, a lot of the things are pushed onto the caregivers. So that kind of, you want to kind of strengthen your caregiver arm in that sense. So for the personal from the personal level, basically a lot of the care part of it and being valued for providing care. Often, the doctor patient ratio in India is such that personalized care is often not possible because you're already like you have a crew waiting outside. So in COVID, using of the virtual communication did make it a lot more personalized, and they did feel a lot more valued. A lot of the communication with your colleagues became more informal, and that led to people being able to respond much faster. And a similar thing that is observed in the policy and environment is that there are Chennai does have a city level disaster management plan, as do a lot of other cities in India. But do we have one in which we are also thinking about our mental health services? Do we have one in which we're thinking about are mentally ill? How do you move them? What do you do with them? And also about the case of homeless, because a lot of our mentally ill become homeless. What do you do that? So in terms of context of travel restrictions and often telemedicine guidelines does not involve how the pharmacist how they will decide who is like a proper patient, who's not. And these are kind of things that are going to play out, and these also need a lot more guidelining. So in just if I were to look at the highlights of what came out, there were adaptations included a lot of personal initiatives, including personal phones, because we are from a resource poor setting. Personal phones, personal time being used. Of course, there is, and also they were involved in a lot of welfare activities for caregivers and families who were known to them, and also continuous action was required, because a lot of the challenges were thrown because people do not understand mental illness in India, and there is kind of there were restrictions because of that. Teleconsultation, like I mentioned in the beginning, this is going to be like a huge area that's going to kind of be very important for India in the coming years, because if you look at psychiatrists, we need 3 per 100,000 population, and we have now less than 0.75. So which means that we have to think about teleconsultation a lot more. But there are problems, like you have to, especially, I don't know if this is an India-based problem, or it's always drawing boundaries, demands from the clients, family involvement into personal issues. I'm sure there are a lot more. We need to look at some of the findings from international studies to look more into this. And what the service provider faces in terms of work-life balance is also quite important, because if you're going to take the same number of doctors and then stretch them to provide services on teleconsultation to all of the patients, then it does have an effect on the service providers. So there are insights, including that can be used for telepsychiatry guidelines, telemedicine guidelines, and also for city-based guidelines, which will be, and also organization-based guidelines, which SCARF is also involved in kind of looking at. So I think that's all from the study at this point. Like I said, we are too early for a lot of interpretation, drawing a lot of interpretations. But there are it was quite an interesting exercise to look at across COVID, how the patient the patient and service provider relationship kind of matured, and there is definitely a chance for opportunities for us to learn, especially the public health services in mental health to learn.